Thanks very much, everyone, for coming along to the first QUT Centre for Data Science Under the Hood seminar for 2022. So for those that don't know me, my name is Chris Trivandi, and I'm one of the program directors in the centre. So it's a real pleasure to introduce our speaker today, who's Aloha Ambe. So Aloha is an early career researcher in the field of human-computer interaction, and she is a postdoc working in the centre, particularly in the data-focused decision-making program. So Aloha's research is in machine learning and artificial intelligence, with a human perspective that incorporates domain experts as well as machine learning experts. So now I'm going to pass it over to Aloha, who has a very interesting title. So the title of the presentation is What We Don't Talk About When We Talk About Machine Learning. So Aloha is going to be talking for, say, 40 to 45 minutes or so, but there's also going to be opportunities to have breaks just in case anyone has any questions. So throughout the presentation, please don't hesitate to type your question into the Q&A or the chat windows, and we can either address those questions during some of the breaks or perhaps at the end. So I'll pass it over to you now, Aloha. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you for that introduction. Hi, everyone. And again, hi, I am Aloha Ambe. I am happy to be here and share this work with you. For this talk, I will share the findings of the exploratory work we conducted with machine learning and domain experts. In our conversations with the practitioners, we found valuable aspects of their practice that are worth unpacking and discussing. So for today, let us talk about what we don't talk about when we talk about machine learning. So with machine learning systems having more impacts on more humans than ever before, our desire is to make a world a better place by improving the design process for machine learning and AI. Now, to improve that process, we need to understand it. So in this presentation, I aim for the following takeaway messages. One of those messages is about the value of going out into the wild and engaging with people, getting to know them, their values, their intentions, and maybe even their passions that drive their practice. That's message number one. And the second one, there are many things that are really important to our practice and behavior that we don't talk about, and we don't explicitly every day articulate and reflect on what we are doing. And machine learning is no different. So I want to share or have that understanding that as we are going about our work in machine learning, there are some things that we don't talk about that are actually really important. The third thing refers to the three themes that we've uncovered, but actually there could be more things. That is why sessions such as this are important, to discover and learn more from all of you. So what I want you to walk away from remembering is that one of the things we don't tend to talk about when we talk about machine learning is our distance to human consequences. The two other themes are who decides how, when something is good enough to proceed, and lastly, the tendency of machine learning development processes to encourage the pursuit of individual goals above overall outcome of the system. So these are the three things that I want you to take away from this talk. The value of going out into the wild, the fact that there can be really important issues that we don't talk about, and the three themes we unearth in this work. Now, the messages of today's talk are best explained by first discussing the stance of the research team. So first, let me share where we are coming from, the research team's reflexivity and positionality. Here's a quote about these concepts. They are from feminist standpoint theory that encourage the identification of a researcher's values, biases, backgrounds, and beliefs, thereby acknowledging that the researcher is in no way an objective, neutral party. In short, positionality refers to what we know and believe, And reflexivity is about what we do with this knowledge, the examination of one's own belief, judgment, and practices during the research process, and how this may have influenced the research. As a HCR researcher myself, it is common practice to be upfront about one's own reflexivity and positionality. By doing this, I acknowledge that my own background, my training, and my values influence the work that I do. So what is our research team's positionality? Let me tell you the story of how we got here. So as mentioned by Chris, this research sits within data-focused decision-making program of the center, which is about the intersection of the human concerns and data science concerns. And it is cognizant of the technical aspects of data science, but it is also cognizant of human issues and how we understand them. Personally, I've come to this space from human-computer interaction background. My training is the understanding of the intersection between technology and human concerns. I'm not in the space as someone who's come through maths, statistics, or data science. I have an understanding about that, but more from the sphere of human concerns. My personal belief is that this is where the action is these days. This is not to say that technology and technicality aren't important. It's very important. But as systems scale up and become bigger and more accessible, technology plays more role in more people's lives than ever before. It is this intersection issue which becomes more prominent. So our research team come to this work with an understanding that interaction is not isolated between humans and machines, but it is within an ecosystem of networks of relations, people, and practices. So this explains our positionality and the motivation of this work. We wanted to understand more about the design and development of systems that use machine learning and AI. What goes on when machine learning systems are being designed? And how do we improve the design process to support human endeavor? By understanding this, we can perhaps look for ways to improve that design process and improve the outcomes of people using these systems. So that's kind of like the big picture. Towards that, we took a human-centered approach by engaging with machine learning experts and other experts and practitioners with machine learning adjacent roles. We conducted some interviews and explored people's experiences, thoughts about the design process of machine learning systems. And this presentation is really a story about what we learned from that. We're trying to get this work published in Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency Conference. So it's in the train, but we think these issues are really important and we really want to share them with you. And we also would really value your reflections and reactions. So the techniques that we use in understanding these human issues might be unfamiliar to some of the audience because they are to do with, excuse me, qualitative research more than mathematics, statistics, or data science per se. I really appreciate it when people make their work accessible to me. So as I'm presenting this, I'm going to try to anticipate things that might not be accessible to people who don't have a background in human-computer interaction or qualitative research. So occasionally, I'll mention a word and I'll explain what that means, just like the slide about reflexivity and positionality. And my intent is not to be patronizing, but it's to acknowledge that the audience is coming from different backgrounds. So also, this is not primarily a technical data science presentation. So we're not talking about mathematical, statistical, or computational techniques. We're talking about the human process of the design of systems that use these techniques. I may raise some different words or different ideas at some point. So I'm going to pause from time to time just to make sure that everyone in the audience is with me. And because we might get some different questions at some parts of the talk. So yeah, so that's the idea or the sections of this talk. So if everyone is happy with that, I'll begin with our approach. So in this work, instead of doing research on people by putting the participants under a microscope and the researcher, designer, experts or external observer, or instead of designing for people by making decisions distance from the context of actual or potential users, we chose to design and work with people. So the common practice when we research people and their needs, we usually conduct requirements analysis, surveys, interviews, focus groups, observations. But in these methods, we ask who frames the questions, who structures the response, who analyzes the data, and who decides the design. So when we research on and for people, it is usually the researchers, designers, experts who have the greater power, voice, and control in this process, especially in framing the problem and solution. So how about a different approach? So for our work, we use a participation and co-design approach. This approach acknowledges that the experiences of users and designers or technical experts or researchers are different from that of the end users. So the designers and experts come in as the source of technology knowledge, the design expertise, and facilitation. And the users, they are part of the process as the source of knowledge about their practices and motivations. So in co-design, they collaborate on designing what the real problem is. Users are not just informants or subjects of the research, but they are active participants. The agency and quality of experience of potential technology users are a priority to understand their own context and culture. So the tenets of the approach are pragmatically, people, technology users are experts in their own domain and practice. And morally, they should have a say in the design. So instead of designing on and for people, it is important to design with people. Here are some snapshots of my PhD projects where I work with older adults. When it comes to technology for older adults, there's a proliferation of design solutions that involve tracking and monitoring them remotely. Older people are often passive recipients of this technology, not really having a say in its design. So through participatory and co-design approach, we explored how older people feel about these kinds of technology. So by working closely with them in the wild or in situ, they actively engage because we are in a place they are most familiar with, doing an activity that they are comfortable doing. And by working with them, we give them a voice in the design process of new forms of technology. And together, we shift the framing of the problem and the solution for grounding their perspective. So in my work with older adults, together with them, we shift the framing of the work from remote passive monitoring to a technology that engages and fosters reciprocity. So it makes a big difference to be in the wild engaging with people. So before I proceed to the next part of the talk, are there any questions about our positionality or the approach we have taken? Yeah, I don't hear any sound, and maybe you can type your questions in the chat as well. So
any questions so far for Aloha? All right, I think just punch on there, Aloha.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
So yeah, go ahead.
So if there's none for now, I'll proceed. So yes, now let us now talk about the details of the paper entitled What We Don't Talk About When We Talk About Machine Learning. So as mentioned earlier, This paper is under review in the ACM Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency Conference. So the paper is the exploratory phase of a much bigger project where David, Margot, and I investigate the design of new systems in which humans and machines interactively learn and explore together. So to have a more reciprocal and synergistic relationship. So what we don't talk about when we talk about machine learning gave us lessons as we prepare for the next phase of the project. So in the initial phase, we worked with 16 machine learning practitioners and domain experts who have machine learning adjacent role as they analyze, interpret, and make decisions with data. So both experts play a critical role to improve people's relationship with data and technology, to be more positive and proactive. So each was involved in at least one machine learning design project, and the participants belong to either a startup, a nonprofit, or research project in academia or industry. All were involved in research endeavor. So the interview is about their work, their personal motivations, and concerns, including the social and cultural aspect of their practice. The semi-structured interviews run between 1 to 2 hours in a mode and at a time and location convenient to the participants. So now let me present the 3 themes that can be described as issues that we don't talk about when we talk about machine learning, even though they seem to have fundamental influence on individuals' practice. I will present these themes as provocative questions, as a literary device to communicate the essence of each theme. It's an idea that emerged after all our interviews were analyzed. We did not put these questions up front to our participants, but the topic and theme unraveled in the conversation. So what are the matters that we don't talk about when we talk about machine learning? First, how close are you to the human consequences of the system you are designing? Second, who decides why and when your system is good enough to proceed and how? Third, how well are your personal goals aligned to the overall outcome? So let us begin with the first question. How close are you to the human consequences of the system you are designing? So this theme is about the distance between a machine learning system designer or developer and the actual or potential consequences of their work to the other human beings. So participants express that their roles put them at certain distance or level of engagement with the application domain and users of machine learning systems. We use the term distance to human consequences to describe the balance of attention given by an expert to the technical goals of machine learning and the impact of its application to other humans. The closer they were to human consequences, the greater their sense of responsibility and accountability to users. We find it useful to characterize 3 ranges of distance to or level of engagement with human consequences. The first range of distance to human consequence is I am an onlooker, hearing, learning about or witnessing human consequences from a distance. So some participants felt that not everyone needed to understand the end users and that being an onlooker is enough. Deb said, it can be useful in some way, engaging with potential users. It can be helpful. But bottom line, probably no. I guess it's easy to get disconnected from human consequences when you are in on your research. I don't think it's often considered. Deb is an expert in AI and computer vision focused on fundamental work. Now, in terms of the potential to engage with users to understand them for his own practice, Leo said, the patient, don't really know. They can be involved unless they're doctors themselves. Maybe that's the only time that they could probably have valid feedback. Leo is a machine learning engineer of an AI startup focused on detecting cancer. So these remarks characterize situations where human consequences were not always central to participants' attention. So participants appreciated the human consequences, but did not experience them as a key influence on their day-to-day practice. They focused more on the technical issues, and these tended to be more important to them. Another range of an expert's distance to human consequences is someone who is naturally part of the space where human consequences occur. So here, Kim and Seth are participants who are part of the space. They are both experts in AI and radiologists, being radiation therapists themselves. Kim said, high pressure situations, you have got a lot of information to absorb very, very quickly. That's when we are worried we might miss something. Kim and Seth have firsthand and ongoing experience of the potential impact of their AI work, that they express a strong sense of responsibility and accountability in the AI systems they are developing. Seth said, once you have radiation, you can't take it back. Safety is really huge on our mind. So for participants like Seth and Kim, they are very close to the human consequences, and the motivations to understand machine learning was driven by concern for those most impacted by the use of the system. So these participants prioritize their patient safety over any novel technology that could be integrated into their practice. So the third level of engagement with or range to human consequences is the constant participation and immersion in the space where human consequences occur. So these experts intentionally and regularly immerse themselves in the application domain through constant discussion with domain experts, and they regularly do site visits. They go in the wild. As Risa puts it, often there is this assumption that technical problems are the hardest problems, and everything else is going to sort itself. Risa is an expert in AI, but over the years of focus and work on the technical aspects of AI, she found the need to engage in the space where human consequences occur. Having a similar experience with Risa, Kate said, we do not live in the discrete world. One system that you can do a week ago might not be valid already the next time. That was the turning point for me. I even have a teaching module on ethics and responsible AI because of this. These participants place themselves where human consequences happen, immerse themselves in constant conversations with domain experts and users, and consistently pursued opportunities to expand their understanding of the less technical and more human-centric aspects of AI and machine learning and its application. So that was the first theme about our distance to human consequences. Now let us proceed to the second thing, which is who decides why and when your system is good enough to proceed and how. Now, this theme is about a particular kind of decision in the technology design and development process where someone somehow has to decide whether the system is safe to be let out or at least proceed to the next stage of development. Participants agreed that deciding when an ML system is ready to be used is a very complicated process, done in consultation with many experts and in consideration of many factors. We often heard the term good enough as participants describe this process. The notion of good enough ML design relates to the ownership of accountability and responsibility in its system design process, a topic that seemed seldom deliberately broached within design discussion. Rather, there often appeared to be a tacit agreement, trust, and acceptance between machine learning and domain expert that blurred whose values and goals permeate the design, as well as who was responsible and accountable for what. So we present two sub-themes under why, when, and how a system is good enough. First, it is about decisions based on benchmarks, standards, regulatory approval, or expert feedback. And the second sub-theme is about the concerns of what is good enough. Performance metrics, gold standards, regulatory body approvals, and positive feedback from domain and machine learning experts were frequently mentioned as an influential in deciding whether machine learning system was good enough to progress to the next stage of development. One indicator for Leo is that his model is good enough in comparison with a human performance. Leo said, at least with a medical application, it is compared against how well a human would perform. Is the model better than the doctor? As for Eli, he stressed on standards and performance metrics as a basis for good enough. We do keep a close eye on his performance. It's a difficult one. We have responsibility. Certainly, one could wait forever for things to be perfect. As for Dan, he comments about domain experts' feedback and publications as indicators of good enough. I asked doctors to confirm the results to make sure the results are good enough and to publish in their top cancer risk journal. So achieving gold standards or surpassing current performance metrics are common goals in machine learning work, especially by those pushing the field towards through their research. However, some participants expressed doubts and concerns about the notion of good enough and how performance metrics are used as the gauge and the focus of innovation. Here is a quote from the paper, The Problem with Metrics is a Fundamental Problem for AI, written by Rachel Thomas and David Uminsky. It goes, overemphasizing metrics leads to manipulation, gaming, a myopic focus on short-term goals, and other unexpected negative consequences. Some of our participants share similar concerns about surpassing current performance metric as the goal for innovation. For Ben, having more than 30 years of experience as a biomedical engineer working with AI systems, he believes that the notion of good enough is not just about performance metrics or reliable measures. It is about working with and on the subtleties that matter. Ben said, my motivation is to try and provide a system that the clinician actually find useful. I think there's a lot more subtlety than getting the lowest ever rate. The subtleties are much more interesting. As for Liam, who is a radiologist and an expert and an AI expert, his worry about good enough is the implementation gap and the confident mistakes an AI system would make. Liam said, testing before an implementation looks more promising than results. The size of that gap is large enough that there are concerns that people may think it works really well. We put it in practice and then we find out 3 years later that it's actually been harming people. So generally speaking, we observe that decisions and decision-making processes about when and why machine learning systems were good enough were not explicitly discussed, rendering accountability for these decisions unclear as a consequence. So that's the second theme. Let's proceed to the third one, which is how well are your personal goals aligned to the overall outcome? Now, this theme is about the extent to which the personal goals and motivation of machine learning system designers line up with the desired outcomes and objectives of the development effort. We present 2 points on the theme around goal alignment with the overall outcome. The first point is about personal motivations or vested interests that vary. Deb recognizes that as an early career researcher, her motivation is to advance her current research project or develop and pursue new ones. She said, in parallel, as you're finishing this work, you're already thinking for the next work, and you're already keeping up to date with the literature. All participants clearly had to attend to a range of technical and domain-related goals. Less obvious but possibly highly influential in their practice were their personal motivations, including for some, the weight or responsibility that comes with designing machine learning systems that affect people's lives. The second point under this theme is about the expressed sense of handing off of responsibility as desired metrics are achieved. So here's a quote from Art. Art is a software engineer working on financial machine learning systems. He said, at the end of the day, the bus stops with the product team and the UX designers because that's what their job is, what they've been hired to do. So they have a responsibility and you've got to trust each other. We saw some experts or practitioners such as clinicians who are close to the complexities of human consequences, while others like data scientists were able to take a more abstract and utilitarian view of the situation. Now, somewhere in the middle, responsibilities are being handed off in trust that everyone's effort will somehow mesh to achieve a common goal. However, we found a blurred line as to who is responsible and accountable for harmful consequences when the different stakeholders have different goals, different approaches in achieving those goals, and different understanding of each other's vested interests. So those are the three themes of what we don't talk about when we talk about machine learning. And if there's any burning question at this stage, I'm happy to take one before I proceed, or we can just continue to the next section of the talk.
We do have one question, Aloha, in the Q&A chat, but that question can wait until the end.
Okay. So let's proceed to the next section. So what do these findings imply if we want to improve machine learning system design? So it is our sense that these findings imply that we need to go on a journey, that designers of these machine learning systems need to go on a journey from detached engagement to interdependent engagement. What do we mean by this? So there is a degree of cultural inertia in machine learning design, a pursuit that can be seen as a fast-paced race to exceed current performance metrics. Many aspire to run that race, generating new publications, winning competitions, and achieving demonstrable innovation in machine learning. Now, these pursuits can be self-contained and self-sustaining. Instead of practices and environments that distance us from the realities of consequences, responsibilities, and accountabilities, let us enhance work environments and practices that lead us closer to them. These realities would eventually be faced once the scientific and technical labor is deployed in the wild. One will have an appreciation of these realities early and all throughout the design and development process when we nurture interdependent engagement by becoming immersed with the human consequences while also expanding our knowledge about the domain. Now, these overlaps promulgate value that may help shift reductionist design thinking to a view that recognizes its broader impacts. So the next major theme these findings imply to us is that we need to go on a journey from handing off accountability to sharing accountabilities. So what do we mean by this? We observed some participants who felt that their scope of responsibility was well defined and clearly limited to a certain aspect of the design process, with the understanding that their knowledge and responsibility is limited based on one's role and expertise. It is important to point out the need for awareness that the scope of responsibility is not limited to just the certain aspects of design process or the location of the designer or developer. The location or role does not free us from responsibility and accountability of the innovations we are producing. Accountability for decision making in machine learning design should be made more explicit among machine learning system designers and developers. By making these decisions more explicit in the development process, where decisions are needed to be made, we could start to have more conversation about how to make these decisions. And last, we feel the findings suggest that we need to foster champions within organizations who are going to drive human-centered shifts in practice. And what do we mean by this? In our interviews, we sense a yearning for change among participants. At different instances in their career, some participants experienced a turning point that led them towards more human-centered pursuits. They expressed worry that the current machine learning practice makes innovators overlook important considerations beyond the technical goals, such as reflection on the practice and impacts of machine learning work. So fostering champions who drive a human-centered shift in practice refers to thinking and taking actions toward changes about integrating mindfulness and practice that relate to human impacts and ethical implications. And we can do this by increasing the intersection between HCI and machine learning work. A way to start change is by asking hard questions such as the ones posed in the findings of this work. Teams may discuss these questions as a way to surface tacit matters that will be easier to talk about once they have been foregrounded. Reflecting upon and discussing these questions already fosters a space where people think of ways to improve. For more changes to happen towards human-centered machine learning design processes, champions are needed to drive how machine learning innovations are produced and used. Champions who catalyze turning points that lead to engagement beyond technical motivation and towards the networks of people and relations and the impact of machine learning systems. So these are the three implications to design based on our findings. And we hope our work offers a new perspective in machine learning design practice and can help develop strategies to improve the process and outcomes of machine learning innovations. So at this stage, I hope you have a new appreciation of the value of going out into the wild and engaging with people, and an appreciation of talking about some things that we don't talk about that are actually important in the design and development of machine learning systems. And also, I hope you have an appreciation of the three themes you've uncovered for our personal reflection by asking, how close am I to the human consequences of the system I am building or designing? Who decides why and when my system is good enough to proceed, and how? How well aligned are my personal goals to the overall desired outcome? And lastly, I hope you have an appreciation of uncovering new avenues and strategies for improving our design and development practices with people who may be impacted by the work we are undertaking. So here are some references I use in this talk. And yeah, I do have more slides that talk about this process in action, but really what I want to make sure is, first of all, that you've got a clear message about what we don't talk about when we talk about machine learning. And so, Chris, I'll stop here and I'm happy to take some questions and comments. Thanks everyone for listening.
Thanks, Aloha. That was a really interesting presentation. So we do have some questions that have come in, so maybe I can read those out to you. So the first one is, I'm really curious to know about different attitudes towards ML. Technology vendors are often wildly optimistic about ML and AI, whereas skeptics can be wildly pessimistic. So what did you see in your interviews?
Thanks for that question. Definitely, there's two schools in terms of the use of AR or machine learning in their practice. So many of our interview or practitioners in the study are actually doing clinical devices or clinicians themselves. So I may be able to touch on that in that domain where there are optimists, you're right, and there's also those who worry. But in our participants' point of view, they see the value of AI and machine learning. But the reason that we have participants who undertake being dual experts of AI as well as their domain expertise like radiology is because the concerns of safety or welfare of patients. So I think what I'm saying is that they are very open to AI and machine learning systems in their practice, but there's a bit wary. So that's why they're also embarking and learning about it. So in terms of the distance human consequences, those were the ones who are in the wild or actually there experiencing every day the consequences. So there's concerns, but also there's optimism. There's kind of the balancing act of that. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Aloha. That definitely makes sense. So for the next question, you mentioned a transition to a human-centered thinking in ML designers. Does this transition relate to number of years of work experience or practice area or research area or something else?
Yes, thanks for that point. So we did touch on that in the paper where we observed that turning points usually happen at later part of the career. So we also acknowledge that as we are starting out, we are working on a niche and we become experts on that niche, and then as we expand the work, that's where possibly non-technical concerns become. We are more open to that. So we did observe that those who are in 10 to 30 years in their career have really explored or focused even to human-centered pursuits over technical pursuits.
Yeah, okay, sure. So for the next question, what is your perspective on the role that methodological machine learning researchers have on the design of these systems? If I develop a model that I don't claim should be used for some form of automated processes, but someone else implements it in an automated manner, what can I really do?
Yes, thank you for that question. So again, we talk about this in the paper as well, that there are things that is beyond the individual. So there are social practices and there are cultural inertia in our field that is actually beyond our control. But I guess by just asking that question, I feel like, yeah, a conversation and a change will happen of possibly, talking about it, maybe writing about it, why you feel that way. So those are the kinds of spark we hope this talk will open up, because definitely even in HCI or in AI machine learning, there's already cultural inertia in the field that is beyond an individual's control. And we do appreciate that, and we discuss more about that in the paper. But definitely your question is, by asking difficult questions, that actually is a positive on our side.
Okay, thanks, Aloha. So there's another question here. Could you please elaborate a little on how you recruited participants?
Yes, so definitely the recruitment what you call it, snowballed from networks of the network of the research team, and also from networking events that we meet or discuss the topic with the potential participants. So yeah, we actually have, it wasn't kind of a cold like, hey, come here, interview. So there was initial conversation if they are happy to be part of the work, and that is through networks and networking events, and then it snowballed from there.
Yeah, so I guess the question's sort of around like, is there some kind of bias in terms of who might accept to do these interviews? There might be people that are more sympathetic towards a human-centered approach. And so a follow-up question is, um, so for participants who might be more resistant to this sort of perspective, how would they perceive the findings and recommendations?
Yeah, good question because as I think the last part of the talk, we talk about this yearning for change, but you're right, there are participants who felt like, oh, the practice is okay as is. And I'm actually also inspired by yesterday's seminar. There was this talk about, yeah, we have some roles that we do need to play in the ecosystem or in the process. And with that, sometimes, yeah, we need to focus on them. But then the idea is that not really, changing or not having machine learning engineer do HCI work, but it's more of that engagement or possibly intersection of work or having that conversation or collaboration. So it's not about a 180 change, but it's about a complementing of work. And yeah, I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. Thanks, Aloha. So maybe I also have a question. Maybe it's a bit of a naive question, but and a little bit more on the technical side. So after you incorporate the sort of human focus aspect into the machine learning design, can you give some examples about how it actually changes the ML that's used? So like, is it suddenly, oh, okay, I was going to use a neural network for this, but now I'm not going to, I'm going to use something else? Or is it something like, okay, so I was going to use a neural network with this loss function, but now I'm going to use this loss function instead. So how does it, from a technical perspective, how does it change the algorithm and things that are used?
Thanks, Chris. Definitely, it's a technical question. So I mentioned that I have a few slides that I thought would be. I think those slides will best explain the.
Yep. Yeah, we still have some time. Yeah.
Yes. So to answer your question about what could this look like, so I think that could be best explained with my current project. So um, apologies in advance that I could not answer your question from a technical perspective, but if I may answer it in a HCI perspective.
Yep.
So an example that I can share with is this project that I am doing with Siren of School of Computer Science. So we are doing this project called Exploring How Older Adults Reconcile Their Qualitative and Quantitative Wellness Data. So basically, we come to the project having me as having that HCI lens and Sirin having that data science lens. So what could this look like? So we started the project to gain a deep understanding of sensory data and human context. So we are using a mixed method approach through a participatory and collaborative perspective. So before we actually before Siren do any manipulation of data or doing some technical work, so we first did an engagement, or this is like the going into the wild. So we spoke with older adults first. We have to set up the study with them. So we go visit and then let them try the devices. So sorry, let me go to the next slide. So to have an understanding of how older people see well-being in terms of the collection of their heart rate and collection of their number of steps, we first went to them and talked with them. And then after engaging with them about their project and they felt comfortable maybe to have to test the devices for 7 days, we had them we also gave them a diary to possibly reflect on each day. And then on this second phase, the storytelling part, we actually went back and talked with them and brought the data and see how they will articulate this data. And then together with them, we were actually correlating their stories with the data. And And we are in the process of basically your question, Chris, of what could this qualitative data look like, or how will this affect the design of any systems or devices that older people relate with in terms of their well-being. So we did this collaborative design with them. They were active participants of the process, and we did find initial findings that would help that decision. So because of the process, we were able to have that dialogue that led an understanding of not just us as a researcher, like what is data, but their perspective. So our participants actually see cycling, and then we thought, as researchers, we thought like, could they be cycling? It's a rainy, we gave them the devices on a rainy week, and like, could they be cycling? But when we got there, they were also confused. What is cycling actually? Then because of this method, we were discussing it, we found out that cycling actually indicated their drive in the car. So while they were in the car, it will record as cycling. So this process led to some understanding what the data from their perspective. And then we also, because of the process, we had this dialogue revealing what data matters to them. Like, to them, the entire span of the data is not really relevant at some point. And then they will ask, like one of the participants said, does the watch collect ECG data? So we got, because of that conversation, we had an idea of what is important to them. And then finally, by working with them, they were able to define an individuated notion of well-being. Like, to them, it's not the number of steps that will indicate their well-being, because they feel like, oh, if I'm cooking, I'm really happy, but it does not really equate that number of steps. Or I'm gardening and I'm happy. So these initial findings, actually, we are in the process of exactly what your question is. We are in this last phase of transforming, of now we know this, what data is valuable to them, what matters to them in terms of their well-being, and now how are we going to translate that into the design, or the design of the machine learning, or even the representation of the data. So I hope that helps. Sorry, it's a very HCI perspective, and I think Siren is here somewhere, but definitely we are in that exploration phase of having that. As I think my last point here is that intersection, the intersection of the work between HCI and machine learning.
Yeah, Aloha, that sounds like a really interesting case study there. So looking forward to seeing what the final outcomes of that one are. So I think we're out of time now. So thanks. Let's thank Aloha again for a really great presentation.